So glad everyone came today. I really appreciate it. I was shocked when I saw the email that our internet's going down at 5 o'clock today. Of course, when you make internet-based art, that was a little tricky. So I'm going to start with the performance. It's about 15 minutes maybe. And then we can take a quick Q&A about the piece. And then I have not that many slides, but just some basic slides to kind of contextualize the work and ideas about the internet and the history of art and how that's connected. Just to give you a quick feedback, quick information about the piece, and I'll go into more detail later, but it is live, it's running live once I get it started, and it's pulling from the internet. Some of the source materials from the Department of Homeland Security's website and all of their alerts. A lot of the words will come, all of the words will come from the Department of Homeland Security. The images are, the words are passed, manipulated and passed into Yahoo images. So the images that you're going to see created are Yahoo reflecting back the words of Homeland Security.
Overseas plant constructum reassessum. Metallic constructum reassessum means metallis. Reassessum means metallic conglomerate.
Overseas plan constructing reassessing metallic constructing reassessing means metallic partnering interdict procedural becoming prior procedural becoming decisions prior sensing
Hatred, September, built, planned, applications charged, applications charged, Miami renewed, extremist, practical, practicing, employee, DAA.
Overseas plan, constructing, reassess, reassessing metallic, constructing, reassess, reassessing means metallic, partnering, interdict, procedural.
Overseas plan, constructing, reassessing metallic, constructing, reassessing means metallic, partnering, interdict, procedural becoming, prior procedural becoming decisions prior
procedural becoming prior procedural becoming decisions prior suppo
Miami renewed, extremist,
preserve division, highlighting, clinical division, highlighting,
So the way it works basically is it goes to Homeland Security every time. There's a loop where it refreshes and you get all new images. So it goes and it pulls down their text. It sorts the text, gets rid of all common 1 and 2 letter English words. It sort of takes a guess based on my algorithm what's a verb and what's a noun, and it divides those. It organizes the words that you see in the black text. It chooses one of the words at random and then does a search at Yahoo Images. Downloads all the images that Yahoo has as a result of that word, and that's what you're seeing for a while. It's got different opacity, it changes, it loops, and then it does the whole cycle again. And then at a certain point, the computer starts to read the text and prints it out. And so one of the things I was playing with just in my mind is, how often should it print? How often does it need to read? And how many people are reading out loud? And so as a work in progress, this was kind of things that I had in my mind, but I haven't actually tried it other than just with myself, kind of printing it out. So this was a good little experiment.
Rob, thanks so much for joining us. Really enjoyed your presentation, and especially sharing all the artwork that we participated in. And it makes me think a little bit more deeply about your use of the internet as a compositional tool. Can you tell us more about that, please?
I started using the internet out of frustration with the mainstream media, and that's ultimately how I began because of the news constantly changing the story. I wanted to make art on a 24/7 mainstream cable news schedule. So the ability to code to allow, as we're even discussing right now, artwork is being made. Automated scripts are running and generating work, scraping it from the web as source material. So using the internet may be new, but the history of collage and assembling other source material has a long history. So I'm combining the automation with the internet, which I think is what makes it interesting for me.
In that art history, there's a lot about time and the artist's use of time. And in that way, I see you parsing or sectioning out time in very unique ways, a lot like you showed us with Coming Out and other works that were durational. But how do you think of time or aspects of time, moments of time in relation to your own work?
Well, the piece tonight started slow and built in density. What was interesting to see, which I hadn't necessarily planned, but only imagined happening, was how the audience participated, and through their participation, that density added to the computer itself, and creating complex images, complex sounds. So even the title Babel sort of hints at that kind of density of information and beginning to lose its legibility. So I was really happy to sort of see how that worked tonight, and so that was a great accident. I was hopeful that it would happen, and it was good to see that it did.
Yeah, that was fascinating because what was interesting, especially with the title, is there's a loss of language, a kind of an immensity to it. But then I also noticed that our audience, the participants themselves, they gained a kind of a language or kind of a power as a group. And is that something you plan as well?
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, I didn't plan that they would become kind of engaged in their own reading of the work, but I did plan that the text itself would be hard to read, that it was broken, that the computer voice itself is not very successful in reading certain English words, and that failure interests me a lot, how the system fails. And then the ability to give that text to people, and they can't easily read that text because of its legibility, was a nice mirror that the machine was failing as well as human beings in its legibility. So that connection and that system failure is really interesting to see in both the audience and in the code.
When I think art historically about visual abstraction, and a display of information, mostly kind of non-camera based, as in the form of like the abstract expressionists. Your collage seems to almost approach sometimes a kind of an anti-graphic comment. And I'm wondering, have we arrived, and are you, as an artist in our culture, changing the rules of the game as far as how abstraction is being perceived?
Well, in relation to my work, I think the abstraction is a question of editing, what's in, what's left out. So the material that's left in the piece is not necessarily abstract in a modernist sense of, say, Brancusi sculpture that's the essence of a particular shape. More that my work has material that gets left out, and the work that gets put in gets focused in a way. So by leaving certain parts out, it does become abstract, if that makes sense. So I view it more as like an editing in the process of the creation. So at the moment that I'm composing the piece, whether it's actual coding or not, but the choices that one makes, do I choose one particular website over another as source material? And if I can't guarantee what that material is going to be, I know it's probably some particular subject. And so then when I juxtapose it with something else, that's going to put a kind of a spin on it and lead you in a different direction, which could appear to be abstract.
Possibly what's adding into that, something that I noticed, is that there's a real level of immediacy, because I'm noticing things from, like, let's say even the current news day, or there's a liveness to this work, a persistence to this work that connects or has a level of resonance with the viewer or listeners that I think is a little bit different. When I know as a viewer, as a participant, that this is all being kind of gathered or sifted, or as you like to say, scraped, which is a good word. It's pretty textural. There's something about that that resonates a little bit differently, knowing that this is almost like a different version of live. So a kind of a duality there in your instant collages. So is that something that you've thought about, or can you share a few ideas?
I mean,
with
something
us about?
I would think about is just the idea of an image. And if you think of today's world where we all have our screens and we're all looking into screens, an image today can be in real time, that sort of time that you're talking about. But an image can be a tool, it can be a button, and it can also be a physical representation of a place. So the idea of an image has much more meaning now, variations of meaning, than maybe if you just think of a photograph or a painting. The idea that an image can be a tool, it can be a representation, and then our experience of time, as you suggest, is different.
Yeah.
We're always in a state of now, from a social media point of view, right? So the screens are constantly getting us to optimize our lives and to think about what is happening now versus a photograph that's hinting at a past.
I like the evocation of photo history there. I think it's very meaningful, especially because of that lack of latency, that we have no time, or that we're constantly managing our time right now, or managing those complexities. So there's a richness or a depth to your work that I think is very alive in that. When I think about your work regarding machine aesthetics, we used to think about that machine, a singular tool, but really, right, the internet is so many machines. Is there something about the plurality of that engine, or if you will, in parentheses, engines, that are at work 24/7, always, and into the future?
Sure. I mean, in many ways it is just one machine, right? Probably the longest running human machine that's never completely crashed. So the idea that ultimately it's McLuhan in reverse, right? Instead of the technology being an extension of our nervous system, we are now the eyes and ears of the machine. We're taking pictures, we're tweeting for the machine. So we're now the sensors of this one machine.
Would the Italian futurists have an opinion on the internet, and maybe even your work with the internet?
I would think the Italian futurists would want to blow it up and tear it down. But the speed in relation to the Italian futurists, clearly they would want and like the speed. The rate of change that the internet has gotten us to experience time differently. We literally perceive time differently. We're always connected, or there's the pressure to always be connected, even if we try not to be. So that feeling of that speed and the pressure of that speed, clearly they would like, I think.
These days, we all seem to have a relationship to the state, or the state apparatus of surveillance. So what do you think is important for you when you're working with the internet, with different agencies, essentially invisibly, with other agents, if you will, autonomous or otherwise, that are putting up work, you're then scraping it back, remixing it, taking it. What's your relationship to the state in that way?
In tonight's piece, the fact that I am literally scraping information from the Department of Homeland Security intentionally as part of the content, I view that a little bit like advertising, right? We're forced to live in a world where we have to look at billboards and ads, and it's difficult to block them. So why can't that be content? Why can't I use that information and remix that? So Homeland Security is watching and listening to us. So I'm using their information and pulling it down and remixing that.
People are trusting of technology, but also fearful of it. And they don't operate with the same level of, let's say, knowledge and autonomy that you do. You're able to work very freely with technology as someone who also authors and code, which essentially allows you a different sense of freedom, or sometimes allows you to maybe be more risky, and then create new content with those invisible partners, many of whom are government agencies. So that's a different aspect of risk-taking, which I think is really amazing and forward-thinking. And I think many of us have a lot to learn from that. I didn't know if that's something that you'd thought about, that someone like yourself gathering those different kinds of skills and honing those different sorts of talents. In many ways, I view you as teaching us new things about security and the state. And that, I think, is sort of risky in a way. And I didn't know if you'd maybe thought of some of those things.
Well, I think I have. The two things that seem to be the two ideas in your question are the content dealing with the state as a subject, and then just the material and the tools that you use to make art. So to understand code and to write with that kind of material, I mean, my background is fine art, and so undergrad materials and techniques class in painting, where you grind your own oil paints and you paint in egg tempera to understand how it works, right? And you may not ever do it again, and having done it once, I never would do it again. That's very labor intensive. But you treat that tube of paint very differently. And so I actually think understanding digital material, digital medium, and how it's constructed, and the biases that all those tools have, which I talked about a little bit after the performance, right? The network has biases, and the tools that you use have biases. To be aware of that is really important as a media maker, so that you can then choose your tools carefully. So I find it very natural, just as my personality, to want to know how they work. And then once you understand that, you can bend it and potentially break it as you try to get it to do what you want it to do.
Rob, thanks for the wonderful lecture and presentation this afternoon, and also for sitting in on this interview with us.
Thanks, Jay. It's been great to be here.